We've just had a fantastic paper from Katie Nield from ClientEarth, Clean Air, Our Right, but Whose Responsibility? Katie explained the problem of air pollution, summarising the major sources and impacts, and you set out the legal framework for action, touching upon the role of central and local government. Katie, are the current limits, which we are patently failing to comply with, adequate?
Well, short answer, no. The slightly longer answer is, whilst we've got illegal levels of nitrogen dioxide across the country, we know that, and national government has been required to draw up air quality plans to address those levels of pollution. The problem that remains is particulate matter, and particulate matter, whilst those legal limits are being met across the country, it is in excess of the World Health Organization guideline levels in vast swathes of the country. And that means that those legal limits just simply aren't set tightly enough. They are above the World Health Organization guidelines, meaning they're less strict than them. And that results in a legal framework both at national and local level that isn't strong enough to require action to address that source of pollution.
Why have we been so ineffective at delivering clean air in this country?
So, firstly, there is the fact that those legal limits aren't tight enough. But when we look at nitrogen dioxide, where those legal limits are being breached across the country, the government has simply dragged its feet for too long. Those limits have been in place since 2010, but we're still waiting for a compliant air quality plan that sets out measures to reduce nitrogen dioxide across the country.
What single measure would ClientEarth most like to see to secure more effective air quality control?
So government's own studies and analysis has shown that clean air zones are the most effective measure at quickly reducing levels of nitrogen dioxide in the centre of our towns and cities. And what do I mean by clean air zone? I mean a zone designated within a town into which the most polluting vehicles are charged to enter. And that has shown to be an effective measure to quickly reduce pollution. But unfortunately, government hasn't shown the leadership to roll out a framework of those zones across the country where they're needed. And we really, really need to see that, to see urgent action.
How significant, in your view, is the role of plan making and development management?
So planning plays a really crucial role actually in air quality, and that's because our modern day sources of pollutants are relatively dispersed. Kind of gone are the days where we have whacking great coal powered stations in the centre of our towns and cities. The main culprits come from road transport emissions, domestic heating emissions, and those are dispersed sources, and therefore plan making and development control is really key to determining where those sources are, how they're used, and how people are exposed to the pollution that comes from them.
How will Brexit impact our right to cleaner air, in your view?
So the main piece of legislation that imposes the regulatory framework in the UK and the requirement for government to take action comes from EU law. It's the Ambient Air Quality Directive. Now, the regulations that transpose that directive will continue to have effect immediately following exit date by virtue of the Withdrawal Act. But unfortunately, because they are secondary legislation, they will be open and risk being open to being amended without parliamentary scrutiny. So there's a real need for new primary legislation to protect the legislative framework in the UK, but also to improve on it. There are lots of ways in which the current framework needs to be patched up and needs to be clarified and needs to be improved. So, like I was saying earlier, the legal limits just aren't tight enough. They don't reflect the current WHO guideline levels, and they should if it's going to adequately protect our health. And secondly, the roles and responsibilities of various levels of local national government aren't very clear. We've got a local air quality management regime that runs in parallel to the regime under the Ambient Air Quality Directive, and there are confusions and a lack of clarity between the two, and that needs to be cleared up.
So, ClientEarth, looking forward, would ClientEarth look to want to see a new piece of legislation covering our right to clean air in this country?
Absolutely, and we've been long calling for it. We've been long calling for a new Clean Air Act to address the problem. And the government's most recent Clean Air strategy is committed to introducing new primary legislation. And the Prime Minister in July this year publicly committed to including clean air provisions within the new Environment Bill. So that is comforting. So it's clear that there is the appetite for new legislation, but we just need to make sure that it does what it needs to do. And part of that, as you suggest, is enshrining our right to clean air. And what does that mean? That means enshrining citizens and NGOs' right to hold government to account and take them to court if they fail to take adequate action and fail to comply with their legal responsibilities.
Given that we have a housing crisis in this country, does ClientEarth think that there should be a moratorium on development in the cities where there is air quality falling below not only EU but also the WHO standards?
Well, the fact of the matter is that we have many towns and cities that have air pollution that is at really dangerous levels and it's affecting people's health. And I just don't think we should be operating under a system which accepts that development has to be inextricably linked to worsening the quality of the environment that we live in, and specifically the air that we breathe. I think there are real solutions to be able to deliver development in a clean way and address, say, emissions from road transport. But they do require kind of a rollout on a national level, and government really needs to step up to the plate.
What is your view on the Mayor's emerging policy in the New London Plan for air quality positives?
So it's really comforting to see a kind of an upward trend in the level of ambition from the Mayor, and we're pleased to see this mention of air quality positive in the New London Plan. But we're yet to see what it actually means, and there's no definition yet of what air quality positive means in practice for individual developments. And some of the concerns might be, there are difficulties with relying solely on off-site mitigation to offset the air pollution impacts of individual schemes. Some of that mitigation might be uncertain. It's very difficult to assess whether, for example, financial contribution will actually lead to the air quality benefits that are needed to offset the impact of development. So the devil will really be in the detail as to how that works in practice.
Finally, Katie, are there any reasons to be optimistic about air quality?
What we've seen from government to date, a number of air quality plans that just haven't been good enough, don't give us huge amounts of optimism in terms of them coordinating action on a national scale that's needed. However, there are some comforting trends that we see. People, younger generations of people are becoming more and more aware of air pollution and the effects it has on their health, and are becoming less inclined to expect to own their own private vehicles, and there is a shift of thinking, I think. So I think in the long term we may be going in the right direction, but we do need more urgent action on a national scale, and more leadership from government to make sure that trend happens, and that trend happens more quickly than it would do if people were just left to their own devices.
Well, we look forward to ClientEarth scrutinising all the plans and measures that we are promised from the various local authorities. Thank you.
Thank you.